Hi, I'm Emma, and 3 weeks ago my sister Jessica screamed at me over five measly dollars for her morning latte because apparently asking me to Venmo her coffee money while she stood there wearing a brand new $200 jacket was perfectly reasonable. She called me selfish when I finally said no. She said I was being petty over pocket change while she had real problems to worry about. But what Jessica didn't know, what none of them knew, was that our grandmother had left me something that would change everything. And when the lawyer read those papers out loud in front of my entire family, well, let's just say nobody was calling me selfish anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The notification popped up on my phone at 7:32 on a Tuesday morning, while I was stirring instant coffee in my tiny kitchen. My apartment in Southeast Portland wasn't much, just 600 square feet above a vintage clothing store, but the morning light came through the east-facing window and hit my desk just right for working. I had 3 design projects due that week, and my bank account was sitting at exactly $412 until my next client payment came through. Jessica's message was brief and familiar. Can you Venmo me $5 for coffee? Totally forgot my wallet and I'm already in line at Starbucks. You're a lifesaver. No please, no question mark, just the assumption that I'd comply like I always did. I stared at the screen while my coffee cooled, watching the cursor blink in the reply box. $5 shouldn't matter. That's what I told myself every time these requests came through, which was about twice a week now. 5 here, 20 there, 50 for her daughter's soccer cleats, 30 because her grocery budget was tight this month. Always small amounts, always framed as emergencies, always with that particular tone that made saying no feel cruel. But this morning, something felt different. Maybe it was because I'd spent the previous evening calculating whether I could afford both groceries and my car insurance payment this month. Maybe it was because I'd eaten ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights running while Jessica posted Instagram stories from her weekend wine tasting in Willamette Valley. I set my phone face down and walked to the window. Jessica, you just bought that jacket you're wearing, the burgundy leather one you showed me last week. That was $200. That's completely different. That was a work investment. I need to look professional for client meetings. This is just coffee. $5, Emma. We're family. There it was, the magic word that was supposed to dissolve all boundaries and make every request reasonable. Family. The word that had justified years of small withdrawals from my savings account. The word that made me feel guilty for wanting to keep money I'd earned designing logos for small businesses and wedding invitations for strangers. I know we're family, I said, watching a woman across the street unlock her bicycle from a post. She looked about my age, dressed in scrubs, probably heading to a morning shift at the hospital. I wondered if her sister texted her for coffee money. But I'm not your personal ATM. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Jessica wasn't used to hearing no from me, especially not with an edge to it. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted to the tone she used with her kids when they misbehaved in public. Wow, okay. I guess I know where I stand now. It's $5, Emma. $5, and you're acting like I asked for your kidney. I have 2 children, and a mortgage and actual responsibilities, and you're being selfish over the cost of a sandwich. You have a mortgage because you have a house, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. You have 2 children because you chose to have them. And you have responsibilities because you're an adult, not because you're more deserving of my money than I am. Your money? She laughed, but it sounded forced. You live in a studio apartment above a thrift store. You eat cereal for dinner half the time. What exactly are you saving up for? What's so important that you can't help your sister with $5? The question hung between us like a challenge. What was I saving for? An emergency fund that never seemed to grow because of requests like this one? A security deposit for a better apartment that felt impossible when I was constantly supplementing other people's budgets? The freedom to say no without feeling like a terrible person? I'm saving for the right to choose what I do with my own paycheck, I said finally. And I'm choosing not to send you money for coffee when you're standing there wearing an outfit that costs more than my monthly food budget. The line went quiet except for the background noise of the coffee shop. I could hear the espresso machine hissing, other customers placing orders, The normal sounds of people who could afford their morning rituals without asking family members to subsidize them. You know what? Jessica's voice was tight now, controlled in a way that meant she was really angry. Fine, I'll figure it out myself, but don't come crying to me next time you need help with something. Don't expect me to include you in family stuff if you're going to be petty over pocket change. Mom's going to hear about this. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my kitchen with the dial tone buzzing in my ear and the distinct feeling that I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. My coffee had gone completely cold, and the morning light had shifted away from my desk, leaving the apartment feeling smaller and darker than it had 20 minutes earlier. I knew Jessica would follow through on her threat to tell our mother. Linda Martinez had raised us with a particular philosophy about family loyalty that didn't leave much room for financial boundaries. In her world, blood ties meant shared resources, and questioning that system was tantamount to rejecting the family itself. I could already imagine the conversation that would happen later today. The gentle but firm suggestion that maybe I was being too rigid, too focused on money instead of relationships. But as I poured my cold coffee down the drain and started over, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time when it came to my family. Relief. For once, I'd said no and meant it. For once, I'd prioritized my own financial security over someone else. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Else's convenience. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time, like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. My phone stayed quiet for the rest of the morning while I worked on a logo design for a local bakery. The silence felt significant, loaded with the weight of relationships, shifting in ways I couldn't predict. By lunch, I'd managed to convince myself that maybe Jessica would let it go, that this would be one of those family disagreements that faded away without larger consequences. I was wrong. The group text started at 2:15 in the afternoon. It was one of those family chains that included me, Jessica, our mother, and usually Marcus, though he rarely contributed more than thumbs-up emojis to most conversations. This time, the subject line read, Family Meeting Sunday, and Jessica had already typed out 3 paragraphs by the time I opened it. I think we need to talk about some things that happened today. Emma and I had a disagreement this morning that really opened my eyes to some issues we've been ignoring as a family. I love my sister, but I'm concerned about the way she's been pulling away from all of us lately. She's becoming really focused on money in a way that doesn't feel healthy, and I think it's affecting her relationships with the people who care about her most. I read the message twice, feeling my chest tighten with each word. Jessica had managed to reframe the entire conversation, turning my boundary setting into a character flaw and my financial caution into a relationship problem. It was masterful manipulation, the kind that made me question my own memories of what had actually happened that morning. Linda's response came within minutes. Oh, honey, I've been worried about the same thing. Emma's been so distant lately, and I know money stress can really change people. Let's definitely sit down as a family and work through this together. Emma, sweetheart, we love you and we want to help. There it was again, that particular brand of family love that required me to be the problem so everyone else could be the solution. I stared at the messages, trying to figure out how to respond without either capitulating completely or making everything worse. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before I typed back a simple, "What time on Sunday?" The rest of the week passed in a strange suspension of normal family interaction. No random requests for small amounts of money, no casual texts about weekend plans, no photos of Jessica's kids that I was expected to respond to with enthusiasm. It was like they'd all agreed to freeze me out until Sunday's family meeting, where presumably I'd be expected to apologize for my selfishness and promise to be more flexible about sharing resources in the future. But something had shifted in me that Tuesday morning, something that couldn't be easily shifted back. For the first time in years, I found myself questioning not just individual requests for money, but the entire system that made those requests feel normal. When had I become the family bank? When had my financial stability become everyone else's safety net? And why was wanting to keep my own money considered selfish when asking for other people's money was considered reasonable? I spent Thursday evening going through my bank statements from the past year, adding up all the small transfers to Jessica and Linda. The total made me feel sick. $1,800 over 12 months. Money that could have been an emergency fund or a down payment on a better apartment, or even just the peace of mind that came with having savings. $1,800 that had disappeared into other people's budgets while I ate ramen and worried about whether I could afford new tires for my car. Friday brought an unexpected text from Marcus, Jessica's husband, the first direct message he'd sent me in months. "Hey Emma, just wanted you to know that Sunday isn't my idea. I think you have every right to say no to things that don't work for your budget. See you at your mom's house." It was brief but felt like a lifeline, a suggestion that maybe I wasn't completely losing my mind or my moral compass. Saturday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandma Rose, about the way she'd handled family financial drama when I was growing up. She'd been generous but never a pushover, always willing to help, but never at the expense of her own security. She'd paid for my school clothes a few times when money was tight, but she'd also been the one to teach me the difference between helping and enabling. "You can't save people from the consequences of their own choices," she'd told me once when I was 16 and upset about my mother's latest financial crisis. "All you can do is decide what you're willing to give and what you need to keep for yourself, and don't let anyone make you feel guilty for having boundaries." I wished she was still around to navigate Sunday's family meeting with me. I wished I could call her and ask for advice about how to stand firm without destroying relationships. Most of all, I wished I had her certainty about right and wrong, her ability to see through manipulation and respond with clarity instead of guilt. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical Portland weather that matched my mood perfectly. I drove to my mother's townhouse in Tigard, with my stomach in knots and a folder of bank statements on the passenger seat. I wasn't sure if I'd need them, but having proof of the money I'd given felt important. Like evidence in a trial where I was both the defendant and my own lawyer. Linda's house always smelled like vanilla candles and coffee, warm and inviting in a way that made it easy to forget about conflict. She'd set out pastries from the grocery store bakery and made a full pot of coffee, the kind of spread that suggested this was meant to be a pleasant family gathering rather than an intervention about my character flaws. Jessica was already there, sitting on the couch with her legs tucked under her, looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had over the phone. Marcus sat beside her, his expression carefully neutral, while Linda bustled around the kitchen making sure everyone had enough coffee and napkins and anything else that might smooth over the tension in the room. "Emma, sweetheart, come sit down," Linda said, patting the armchair across from the couch. "We're just so glad we can all be here together to work through this." I sat down and accepted the coffee mug she handed me, noting that it was one of the good ones, part of a set that Jessica had given Linda for Christmas 2 years ago. Everything in the room felt carefully choreographed, designed to remind me of family bonds and shared history, and all the reasons I should be more flexible about money. "So," Jessica began, her voice softer than it had been on Tuesday, "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation this week, and I realize I might have come across as entitled. That wasn't my intention. I just think there might be some miscommunication about family expectations and support systems." It was a careful non-apology, acknowledging fault without actually admitting to any specific wrongdoing. I sipped my coffee and waited for her to continue. "The thing is, Em, we're family. We help each other. That's what families do. And I feel like lately you've been pulling away from that, building walls instead of bridges. I'm worried that your financial anxiety is making you think of money as more important than relationships." "How much money have I given you in the past year?" I asked quietly. The question seemed to catch her off guard. "What do you mean?" "Exactly what I said. How much of my money have you received in the past 12 months? Jessica looked at Marcus, then at Linda, as if seeking support or clarification. "I don't know off the top of my head. It's not like I keep track of every little thing." That's not what family relationships are about. I opened the folder on my lap and pulled out the highlighted bank statements. "I do keep track. $1,800. That's what I've given you and Mom over the past year, in small loans and emergency requests and contributions to family events." The room went quiet, except for the sound of rain against the windows. Linda set down her coffee mug with a small clink that seemed unnaturally loud. $1,800 that I earned designing websites and business cards, and wedding invitations. $1,800 that came out of my grocery budget and my savings account and my ability to plan for my own future. And when I finally said no to $5 for coffee, I'm the one with the problem. Jessica's face had gone pale. Emma, that's not fair. You're making it sound like I'm taking advantage of you, and that's not what's happening here. Those weren't loans, those were family contributions. That's what people do when they care about each other. Family contributions, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it now? Because I don't remember any family meetings about my contributions to everyone else's budgets. I don't remember being asked if I could afford to be everyone's financial backup plan. Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Linda was staring at her hands, apparently fascinated by her nail polish. The silence stretched until Jessica finally spoke again. You know what, Emma? Maybe this is about more than money. Maybe this is about the fact that you've never really been part of this family in the way the rest of us are. You've always been on the outside, always been different. Maybe that's why it's so easy for you to be selfish about things the rest of us would share without thinking twice. The words hit like a physical blow, not because they were entirely untrue, but because they contained just enough truth to make them devastating. I had always been different, quieter, more careful with money and relationships and trust. I had always felt like I was on the outside of family dynamics, watching and trying to figure out the rules that everyone else seemed to understand instinctively. But for the first time, sitting in my mother's living room with bank statements in my lap and the taste of manipulation sharp in my mouth, I wondered if being on the outside might actually be the better place to be. You're right, I said, standing up and tucking the folder under my arm. I am different. I'm different because I think taking someone's money without permission is stealing, even if you're related to them. I'm different because I think asking for help should involve actual gratitude instead of guilt trips when the answer is no. And I'm different because I think family love shouldn't come with a price tag. I walked toward the door, feeling lighter with each step. Behind me, I could hear Jessica starting to cry, the kind of dramatic sobbing that was designed to make everyone else feel guilty for causing her distress. Linda was already moving to comfort her, murmuring soothing words about how I didn't really mean what I'd said, how I was just stressed and overwhelmed. But I did mean it. For the first time in years, I meant every word I'd said about money and family and the difference between helping and being used. And as I drove home through the gray Portland afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time when it came to my family. I felt free. The silence in my apartment felt different when I got home from my mother's house that Sunday. Not empty, but full of possibility. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my small kitchen table, looking out at the street below where people were going about their normal Sunday routines. Dog walkers, cyclists, families heading home from brunch. None of them knew that I'd just walked away from a lifetime of being my family's personal bank account. My phone had been buzzing consistently since I left Linda's house, but I hadn't looked at it yet. I knew what I'd find there. Angry texts from Jessica, concerned messages from my mother, probably a few missed calls that I wasn't ready to answer. Instead, I opened my laptop and did something I'd been putting off for months. I updated my freelance rates. $25 an hour had seemed reasonable when I was desperate for work and grateful for anything. But I'd been undervaluing myself, accepting projects that barely covered my expenses while my clients profited from my designs. If I was going to be financially independent, truly independent, I needed to stop apologizing for wanting to be paid fairly for my skills. I was in the middle of redesigning my portfolio website when Sarah came home from her shift at the hospital. My roommate had been working doubles all weekend, and she looked exhausted as she dropped her bag by the door and kicked off her shoes. "How was the family meeting?" she asked, settling onto our second-hand couch with a groan. Sarah had heard enough stories about my family's financial dynamics over the past year to know that today's gathering wasn't going to be a pleasant one. I told them I'm done being their ATM, I said, not looking up from my laptop screen. Jessica called me selfish for refusing to send her $5 for coffee, so I showed them exactly how much money I've given them over the past year. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "How much?" $1,800. Jesus, Emma, that's like 3 months of rent. I know. The number felt even more staggering when someone else said it out loud. I've been so focused on the individual requests that I never added them up. $5 here, $50 there. It all seemed manageable until I saw the total. Sarah pulled her dark hair into a messy bun and studied my face. How do you feel about it? About telling them no? Terrified, I admitted, but also relieved. Like I can finally breathe properly for the first time in years. My phone buzzed again, and this time I glanced at the screen. 7 missed calls from Linda, 12 unread text messages, and 3 voicemails. The digital evidence of my family's panic was mounting, but I wasn't ready to deal with it yet. Instead, I closed my laptop and decided to take a walk. Laurelhurst Park was only a few blocks from my apartment, and the late afternoon light was filtering through the oak trees in a way that made everything look soft and forgiving. I found an empty bench near the pond and watched ducks paddle around in lazy circles. The normalcy of it felt grounding after the intensity of the morning. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice when someone sat down on the other end of the bench. It was an older woman, maybe in her 70s, with silver hair and the kind of practical clothing that suggested she was a regular park visitor. "Beautiful day for a walk," she said, settling her small purse on her lap. "Though you look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders." I managed a small smile. "Just family stuff. You know how it is." "Oh, I certainly do." She chuckled, but it wasn't entirely amused. "I've got 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren, and let me tell you, the older they get, the more complicated the problems become. When they were little, a Band-Aid and a cookie could fix anything. Now they want me to fix marriages and mortgages and career choices, and half the time they get mad at me no matter what I do." "Do you ever feel like you're expected to solve problems that aren't really yours to solve?" I asked. The woman looked at me with sharp, knowing eyes. "Honey, that's the eternal struggle of being a woman in a family. Everyone assumes you're the emotional and financial safety net, and when you finally say you need to take care of yourself first, suddenly, you're selfish." She paused, watching a duck dive under the water. "But you know what I learned after 72 years on this planet? People will take whatever you're willing to give, and they'll always ask for more. The only person who can set limits is you." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the water and the people walking their dogs. When she finally got up to leave, she patted my shoulder gently. "Whatever family stuff you're dealing with, remember that loving someone doesn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep them warm." I stayed on the bench until the sun started setting, thinking about her words, and about Grandma Rose, and about the $1,800 that had disappeared from my life in $20 and $50 increments. By the time I walked home, I had made a decision. I was going to stop being available for every financial crisis, every emergency that somehow became my responsibility to solve. The next morning brought a new wave of family communication. Linda had left a voicemail at 6 in the morning, her voice thick with tears. "Emma, sweetheart, please call me back. Jessica is so upset, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. We love you so much, and we just want to work this out as a family." Jessica's messages were more direct. "I can't believe you embarrassed me like that in front of Mom. All over $5. You've really shown your true colors, Emma. Don't expect me to include you in family events if this is how you're going to act." But the message that surprised me came from Marcus. "Hey, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I should have spoken up more. Jessica doesn't know I'm texting you, but I think you're right to set boundaries. I've been concerned about the money request too, but I didn't know how to bring it up without causing problems in my marriage." I stared at that last message for a long time. Marcus had always been quiet during family gatherings, content to play with his kids and let Jessica handle most of the social interaction. I'd assumed his silence meant he agreed with everything she did, but apparently he'd been observing more than I realized. I was still processing his text when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, with a Portland area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Emma Martinez?" The voice was professional, male, probably middle-aged. "Yes, this is Emma. Ms. Martinez, this is William Chen from Chen & Associates." I'm the attorney who handled your grandmother Rose Martinez's estate. I have some paperwork that requires your signature, and I was wondering if you could come in this week to take care of it. My heart skipped. I'd thought all of Grandma Rose's estate matters had been settled months ago. She hadn't owned much when she died, just her small apartment's contents, and a modest savings account that had been divided between Linda and her other children. What kind of paperwork? I asked. It's regarding a trust that's reaching maturity. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person, if that's possible. Would Wednesday afternoon work for you? A trust. Grandma Rose had never mentioned anything about a trust. Wednesday is fine. What time? How about 2 o'clock? My office is downtown, on the 15th floor of the U.S. Bancorp Tower. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen trying to make sense of the call. Rose had lived simply, worked as a seamstress for most of her life, never seemed to have extra money for luxuries. What kind of trust could she possibly have set up? And why was I just hearing about it now, more than 2 years after her death? I spent the rest of Monday trying to focus on work, but my concentration kept drifting to the mysterious phone call and the ongoing family drama. Jessica had posted several passive-aggressive messages on Facebook about people who choose money over family, and the importance of gratitude, clearly intended for me to see. Linda had shared an article about family estrangement with the caption, "Sometimes the people we love most are the ones we hurt the most." The manipulation was so blatant, it would have been almost funny if it weren't so exhausting. They were trying to shame me back into compliance, to make me feel guilty enough to apologize and resume my role as the family ATM. But something had shifted in me during that confrontation on Sunday. The guilt was still there, but it was quieter now, overshadowed by a growing sense of self-respect. Tuesday brought an unexpected visitor. I was working at my kitchen table when I heard footsteps on the stairs outside my apartment, followed by a soft knock on the door. Through the peephole, I could see Marcus standing in the hallway, looking nervous and holding a coffee cup from the shop downstairs. "Hi," he said when I opened the door. "I hope it's okay that I came by. I brought you coffee. The good kind, not the $5 Starbucks that started this whole mess." I couldn't help but smile at that. "Come in. Fair warning, the place is tiny." Marcus had never been to my apartment before, and I watched him take in the small space, the second-hand furniture, the careful organization required to make 600 square feet livable. He didn't comment on the size, just settled into one of my kitchen chairs and sipped his coffee. "Jessica doesn't know I'm here," he said after a moment. "She's still pretty upset about Sunday, but I wanted to talk to you about something." "About the money?" "About all of it. The money, the guilt trips, the way you've been treated." He set down his coffee cup and looked directly at me. "Emma, I'm an accountant. I notice patterns in spending, and I've been watching Jessica's financial behavior for years. The requests she makes to you, they're not emergencies. They're convenient spending." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she has money in her checking account when she asks you for $50 for groceries. She has plenty left on her credit limit when she needs you to cover Tyler's soccer registration. She could afford these things herself, but it's easier to ask you than to adjust her own spending." The confirmation felt like a punch to the stomach, even though part of me had suspected it all along. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Marcus rubbed his forehead, looking tired. "Because I'm married to her, and calling out your wife's manipulation of her sister is not a conversation that ends well. But watching what happened on Sunday, seeing how she tried to turn the whole family against you for setting a boundary, I realized I can't stay quiet anymore." "Does she know you feel this way?" "She knows I think the money requests are getting out of hand. We've argued about it. But she says it's different because you're family, because you don't have kids or a mortgage or real responsibilities." He paused. "Those are her words, not mine. I think your responsibilities are just as real as ours." We talked for another hour, and slowly a fuller picture emerged. Jessica earned $68,000 a year at her marketing job, while Marcus made $75,000 as an accountant. They had a mortgage, but it was manageable on their combined income. They had childcare costs and soccer fees and all the expenses that came with raising 2 kids, but none of it was beyond their means. The requests to me weren't about need, they were about want. About maintaining a lifestyle that included wine tastings and new clothes and Starbucks coffee without having to make the trade-offs that everyone else made when they spent money on non-essentials. I've been enabling it too, Marcus admitted as he got ready to leave. I should have said something years ago, should have insisted that we handle our own expenses instead of involving you. I'm sorry, Emma. You didn't deserve to be treated like a credit card with legs. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment, thinking about patterns and enablers, and the difference between helping someone and allowing them to avoid responsibility for their own choices. Grandma Rose's words echoed in my memory. You can't save people from the consequences of their own decisions. Wednesday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that matched my nervous mood. The U.S. Bancorp Tower was one of those sleek downtown buildings that made me feel underdressed, even in my best business casual outfit. The law office of Chen and Associates occupied half of the 15th floor, all polished wood and leather furniture that smelled expensive. William Chen was younger than I'd expected, maybe in his early 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His handshake was firm, and he led me into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the Willamette River. Thank you for coming in, Ms. Martinez. I know this might seem unexpected, given how much time has passed since your grandmother's death. I have to admit, I'm confused about why you're calling now. I thought everything was settled. Mr. Chen opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. Your grandmother established a trust 15 years ago, shortly after your grandfather's death benefits were settled. She was very specific about the terms. The trust was to remain confidential until you reached your 27th birthday, at which point you would gain access to both the principal and any accumulated interest. I stared at him, not quite processing the words. I'm sorry, what? A trust? Grandma Rose never mentioned anything about a trust. She wanted it to be a surprise. She felt that if you knew about it earlier, it might affect your work ethic or your relationship with money. She was very proud of your independence and wanted to make sure you developed financial responsibility on your own first. He slid a document across the table toward me. The letterhead read, Rose Elena Martinez Irrevocable Trust, and the language was full of legal terminology that I couldn't quite follow, but the numbers at the bottom were clear enough. The trust was initially funded with $50,000 from your grandfather's life insurance policy, Mr. Chen explained. Your grandmother continued to contribute small amounts over the years, usually around her birthday or Christmas. She was quite frugal, as I'm sure you know, but she managed to save more than most people realized. My hands were shaking as I read through the document. How much is it worth now? As of last week's valuation, the trust is worth approximately $183,000. The words seemed to echo in the quiet conference room. $183,000. More money than I'd ever imagined having, more than enough to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a house, and build the kind of emergency fund that would mean never having to worry about $5 for coffee ever again. Your birthday is May 15th, correct? That's about 6 weeks away. The trust becomes fully accessible to you on that date. I nodded, still staring at the papers. Does my family know about this? Your grandmother was very clear that this information was to remain confidential until the trust matured. I haven't spoken to anyone else about it. But they'll find out eventually, right? I mean, if I suddenly have money that I didn't have before? Mr. Chen leaned back in his chair. Ms. Martinez, what you do with this inheritance is entirely up to you. You're under no legal obligation to share this information with anyone, including family members. Your grandmother set this up specifically for you, and her instructions were quite clear about that. I thought about Jessica's face when she'd called me selfish over $5. I thought about Linda's tears and manipulation, about the $1,800 I'd given away in small increments over the past year. I thought about Marcus's admission that the emergency requests were really convenience spending. What did she say? In her instructions, I mean. Did she leave any messages about why she did this? Mr. Chen smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Actually, yes. She left a sealed letter for you, to be opened when the trust matured. He reached into the folder and pulled out an envelope with my name written in Rose's familiar handwriting. She also left specific instructions about how she wanted you to handle any family conflicts that might arise from this inheritance. My heart was racing as I took the envelope. The paper felt thin and fragile, like it might crumble if I held it too tightly. What kind of instructions? She anticipated that there might be family members who would feel entitled to a share of this money, despite the fact that it was always intended solely for you. She wanted you to know that protecting your financial security was not selfish, and that you shouldn't let anyone convince you otherwise. I stared at the envelope, thinking about the conversation I'd had with Rose when I was 16, about saving people from the consequences of their own choices. She'd been preparing me for this moment even then, teaching me the difference between helping and enabling, between generosity and being taken advantage of. There's one more thing, Mr. Chen said. Your grandmother also established a small educational fund for your nephew and niece, Tyler and Mia. It's separate from your trust, about $15,000 total, to be used for college expenses when they're older. She wanted to make sure the children were provided for, without putting pressure on you to share your inheritance. Even in death, Rose had been thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating the family dynamics and guilt trips that would inevitably follow this revelation. She'd known that Jessica and Linda would expect me to share, and she'd made sure I had both the legal right and the moral justification to refuse. When do I need to make any decisions? I asked. The trust becomes accessible on your birthday, but there's no rush to do anything with the money immediately. It can remain invested while you decide how you want to proceed. I'd recommend taking some time to think about your goals and perhaps consulting with a financial advisor about the best way to manage this inheritance. I left the law office in a daze, clutching Rose's letter and a folder full of trust documents. The elevator ride down 15 floors felt like descending through layers of my old life into something completely new and uncertain. By the time I reached the lobby, I was crying without quite knowing why. The letter stayed unopened on my kitchen table for the rest of the afternoon while I paced around my small apartment, trying to process what had just happened. $183,000. It was enough money to change everything, to give me the kind of financial security I'd been dreaming about since I started freelancing. But it was also going to change my family relationships in ways I couldn't predict. Sarah found me sitting on the floor next to my coffee table at 7 that evening, the unopened letter still in my hands. Emma? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I might have, I said, and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more amazed with each detail. When I finished, she sat down on the floor next to me and stared at the letter. Are you going to open it? I'm scared to. Why? Because once I read it, this becomes real. And once it's real, I have to decide what to do about my family. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Emma, what do you think your grandmother would want you to do? I thought about Rose, about her quiet strength and practical wisdom, about the way she'd lived, simply but with dignity, never asking anyone for help she didn't truly need. About her belief that love meant helping, but help only counted when it wasn't expected or demanded. I think she'd want me to take care of myself first, I said finally, and then help others from a position of strength, not weakness. That sounds about right. I took a deep breath and carefully opened the envelope. Rose's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, evidence of her declining health in her final years, but her words were clear and firm. My dearest Emma, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means you've learned about the trust I set up for you. I hope it comes as a pleasant surprise, and I hope it gives you the security and independence that every young woman deserves. I know your family well, sweetheart, and I know there will be people who think you should share this money with them. They will tell you that family means sharing everything, that keeping this inheritance for yourself is selfish. Don't listen to them. This money is yours, because you are the one who visited me every week in my final years. Not because you expected anything in return, but because you cared about an old woman's stories and loneliness. This money is yours, because you are the one who helped me with groceries and doctor's appointments, without being asked, without keeping track of what I owed you. Most importantly, this money is yours, because you have always been responsible with what you have. even when what you had wasn't much. I watched you give and give to people who took your generosity for granted, and I wanted to make sure that your kindness didn't leave you vulnerable in your old age. Use this money wisely. Invest in your future, your security, your dreams. Help others when you can and want to, but never because you feel obligated or guilty. And remember that saying no to people who would take advantage of you is not selfish. It's self-preservation. You have a good heart, Emma, but you also have a strong spine. Don't let anyone convince you to bend it for their convenience. All my love, Grandma Rose P.S. I've made sure Tyler and Mia will have money for college, so you don't need to worry about the children's futures when you're making decisions about your own. I read the letter 3 times, hearing Rose's voice in every word. She'd known exactly what would happen when this trust became public knowledge. She'd anticipated the guilt trips and manipulation, the accusations of selfishness, the pressure to share what was mine. But she'd also given me permission to prioritize my own financial security, to build the kind of life where I'd never again have to choose between groceries and helping someone who could afford to help themselves. What are you thinking? Sarah asked gently. I'm thinking my grandmother was a lot smarter than I gave her credit for, I said, folding the letter carefully. And I'm thinking that maybe it's time I started acting like I inherited more than just her money. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time I inherited her backbone too. Outside, the Portland evening was settling into darkness, and I could hear the sounds of the city continuing its normal rhythms. Cars passing, people walking home from dinner, the distant hum of the Max train. Life going on as usual while my world shifted into something entirely new. In 6 weeks, I would be 27 years old and financially independent for the first time in my life. I would have enough money to never again worry about whether I could afford to say no to unreasonable requests. I would have the luxury of helping people because I wanted to, not because I felt guilty or obligated or afraid of being called selfish. But first, I had to survive the revelation of this inheritance to my family. And based on everything that had happened over the past week, I suspected that was going to be the hardest part of all. The days following my discovery of the trust fund felt like living in 2 different realities. On the surface, everything continued as normal. I worked on client projects, paid my bills, ate dinner with Sarah, and pretended that my entire financial future hadn't just been transformed. But underneath, I carried the weight of this massive secret, this knowledge that in just over a month, I would become someone entirely different in my family's eyes. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Jessica and Linda continued their campaign to make me feel guilty about refusing $5 for coffee, I was sitting on information about an inheritance worth more than most people's annual salaries. Every passive-aggressive Facebook post about family loyalty and every concerned text from my mother about my changed attitude took on a surreal quality when I knew what was coming. I'd been carrying Rose's letter in my purse for 3 days, reading it whenever I needed to remember that setting boundaries wasn't cruelty. The paper was getting soft from handling, but her words remained sharp and clear. Don't let anyone convince you to bend your spine for their convenience. It was becoming my daily mantra. Thursday morning brought an unexpected text from Tyler, Jessica's 8-year-old son. Aunt Emma, Mom says you're mad at us. Are you still going to come to my baseball game this weekend? The message was clearly dictated by Jessica, but seeing it attributed to my nephew made my chest tighten with guilt. She was using her children as emotional weapons now, trying to make me feel like my boundary setting was hurting innocent kids. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Hi, buddy. I'm not mad at you or Mia. I love you both very much. I can't make it to the game this weekend, but I hope you hit a home run. It was true enough. I wasn't angry with the children, but I also wasn't ready to subject myself to Jessica's manipulation in a public setting where she could use the kids' presence to prevent me from defending myself. The response came within minutes, clearly from Jessica's phone. Tyler is really disappointed. He doesn't understand why his favorite aunt suddenly doesn't want to be part of the family anymore. The manipulation was so blatant, it was almost impressive. She'd managed to make my absence about rejecting the children rather than protecting myself from her financial exploitation. I showed the text to Sarah when she got home from her shift. She read it twice, her expression growing more disgusted with each word. "This is emotional blackmail," she said flatly. "She's using those kids like shields." I know, but knowing it's manipulation doesn't make it hurt less. Emma, think about this logically. If Jessica really cared about Tyler's feelings, would she be telling an 8-year-old that his aunt doesn't want to be part of the family? Would she be involving him in adult financial conflicts? Sarah was right, of course. A mother who actually prioritized her children's emotional well-being wouldn't be using them as pawns in a guilt campaign. But logic didn't erase the image of Tyler's disappointed face or the fear that my nephews would grow up thinking I'd abandoned them over money. Friday evening, I was working late on a website design when my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with some hesitation. Our conversation earlier in the week had been supportive, but I wasn't sure where his loyalties would ultimately lie. "Emma, I need to warn you about something," he said without preamble. "Jessica knows I came to see you. She found the coffee cup from your neighborhood shop in my car." My stomach dropped. "How much trouble are you in?" "Let's just say it's been a difficult few days in my house, but that's not why I'm calling. Jessica is planning something for this weekend. She's organized a family intervention." "What kind of intervention?" "She's invited your mom, your Uncle Roberto, and your cousin Maria. She's telling everyone that you've become obsessed with money and that you're destroying family relationships over small amounts. She wants them all to talk to you about the importance of family unity." I sat down hard in my desk chair. An intervention? As if my desire to keep my own money was a psychological disorder that required group therapy. "When is this supposed to happen?" "Sunday afternoon. She's planning to show up at your apartment with everyone in tow. She thinks if enough family members express concern about your behavior, you'll realize you're being unreasonable and go back to the way things were." The audacity was breathtaking. Jessica was so convinced that she was entitled to my money that she was organizing my extended family to pressure me into compliance. "Marcus, thank you for telling me. I know this puts you in a difficult position." "I'm already in a difficult position. My wife has spent the last week obsessing over this conflict instead of focusing on our marriage or our kids. She's more upset about losing access to your money than she is about damaging her relationship with you." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about Sunday's planned ambush. Jessica had always been skilled at controlling narratives, at presenting herself as the victim of other people's unreasonableness. I could easily imagine how she'd frame this intervention. Emma's become selfish and money-obsessed. She's choosing dollars over family love. We need to help her see that relationships matter more than financial boundaries. But I also knew something Jessica didn't know. In 10 days, I would turn 27 and everything would change. The trust fund would become accessible, and I would have concrete proof that my financial caution had been warranted all along. The question was whether to reveal this information during Sunday's intervention or wait until after my birthday to drop the bombshell. Saturday morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called my Uncle Roberto directly. Roberto was Linda's younger brother, a mechanic who'd raised 3 kids on a modest income and somehow managed to put all of them through college. He'd always been the most financially responsible member of our extended family, the one who fixed his own car instead of buying new ones, and who grew vegetables in his backyard to save money on groceries. "Emma, Mija, how are you? Your mother says there's been some family tension lately." "Uncle Roberto, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. If someone in the family asked you for money every few weeks, small amounts but consistently, would you consider that normal?" There was a pause. How small amounts are we talking about? $5 for coffee, $50 for groceries, $30 for gas, always presented as emergencies or temporary loans. And how often? 2 or 3 times a month, for over a year. Roberto was quiet for a long moment. "Emma, in my house, if one of my kids needs money for emergencies that often, we sit down and look at their budget to figure out what's wrong. Because either they're not managing their money properly, or what they're calling emergencies aren't really emergencies." That's what I thought. Are we talking about Jessica? We're talking about Jessica and Mom. Another pause, longer this time. How much money total? $1,800 last year. Dios mío, Emma. $1,800? That's not family helping family. That's one person bankrolling other people's lifestyle choices. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, and by the end, I had a much clearer picture of how the intervention would likely go. Roberto promised to ask pointed questions about Jessica's actual financial situation, and to push back against any narrative that painted my boundary setting as selfishness. You know, mija, he said before we hung up, your grandmother Rose used to say that the people who scream loudest about family loyalty are usually the ones who understand it least. Sunday afternoon arrived with typical Pacific Northwest drizzle, the kind of weather that made staying indoors feel cozy rather than depressing. I'd spent the morning cleaning my apartment and preparing for what I suspected would be an emotionally exhausting confrontation. Sarah had offered to stay for moral support, but I'd decided to face this alone. They arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, like a delegation of concerned relatives. Jessica led the group, followed by Linda, Roberto, and my cousin Maria. The fact that they'd coordinated their arrival time confirmed that this was indeed a planned intervention, rather than a spontaneous family visit. Emma, sweetheart, Linda began before she'd even fully entered my apartment. We're all so worried about you. This conflict with Jessica has gotten out of hand, and we thought maybe if we all sat down together, we could work through this misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, I said, gesturing for everyone to sit down. It's a disagreement about financial boundaries. Jessica immediately took control of the narrative, her voice taking on the tone she used for client presentations. Emma's been acting differently lately. She's become fixated on money in a way that's really concerning. Last week, she refused to help me with $5 for coffee, and then she attacked me with spreadsheets and accusations about taking advantage of her. I didn't attack you with spreadsheets, I said calmly. I showed you documentation of how much money I've given you over the past year. How much money? Roberto asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. Jessica shot him a look that suggested this wasn't the question she'd been expecting. That's not the point. The point is that Emma's making family relationships about money instead of love. But how much money? Roberto persisted. Because if we're going to talk about this, shouldn't we all understand the actual situation? I walked to my kitchen and retrieved the folder of bank statements I'd shown Jessica the previous week. $1,800, I said, setting the papers on my coffee table. That's what I gave Jessica and my mother last year in what were presented as temporary loans and emergency assistance. Maria whistled low under her breath. She was close to my age, a single mother who worked as a teacher and understood what $1,800 meant in a young person's budget. Emma, that's like a huge amount for someone in your situation. It's really not that much when you spread it out over 12 months, Jessica said quickly. And it's not like I was asking for rent money or anything major. Just small amounts here and there when things got tight. But things got tight twice a week? Roberto asked. For a whole year? Jessica, you make good money at your job. Marcus makes good money. Why were you having financial emergencies every few days? They weren't emergencies, I said quietly. They were convenience requests. Jessica would ask me for grocery money while posting pictures of new clothes on social media. She'd need gas money the same week she'd gone wine tasting in Yamhill County. The room went quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows. I could see Linda processing this information, probably calculating how much money she'd also requested over the past year. Maria was studying the bank statements with the expression of someone who understood exactly how difficult it was to save money on a modest income. Emma, Linda said carefully, even if the amounts were larger than we realized, we're still family. Family helps each other. That's what love looks like. Does love also look like Jessica organizing an intervention because I said no to $5? I asked. Does love look like using Tyler and Mia as emotional weapons to make me feel guilty for setting boundaries? Jessica's face flushed. I never used my children as weapons. You sent me a text from Tyler's phone saying I was disappointing him by not coming to his baseball game. You told an 8-year-old that his aunt doesn't want to be part of the family anymore. Because that's how it feels, Jessica snapped, her composure finally cracking. You've completely cut us off over money. You won't help with anything anymore. You've become selfish and cold, and yes, it's affecting my kids because they notice when their favorite aunt suddenly disappears from their lives. I disappeared from their lives? I stood up, feeling something fierce and protective rising in my chest. Jessica, I've been to more of Tyler's baseball games than his own father has this season. I've babysat Mia every time you and Marcus wanted a date night. I drove to urgent care with you when Tyler broke his arm, and I stayed up all night helping Mia with her science project when you had a work deadline. That's different. That's not about money. No, it's not about money, it's about love. It's about showing up for people without expecting payment or favors in return. But somehow, when I show up with my time and energy and presence, that doesn't count as family contribution. Only my money counts. Roberto was nodding slowly. Emma's right. I remember my mother, your grandmother Rose, saying that the most generous people in families are often the ones who give everything except money, because money is the only thing people remember to ask for. Don't bring Grandma into this, Jessica said. She would be horrified by the way Emma's acting. She believed in family loyalty. She also believed in self-respect, I said. She believed that loving someone didn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. The conversation continued for another hour, circling through the same arguments and justifications. Jessica maintained that my boundary setting was selfish and destructive. Linda worried that I was prioritizing money over relationships. Maria and Roberto asked increasingly pointed questions about the family's financial expectations and Jessica's actual need for assistance. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I need to tell you all something, I said, walking to my bedroom and retrieving the folder from Mr. Chen's office. There's information that's going to become public in 10 days anyway, and I think you should hear it from me first. I sat back down and pulled out the trust documents, setting them on the coffee table next to the bank statements. Grandma Rose left me a trust fund. I found out about it this week. It becomes accessible on my 27th birthday. The silence in the room was absolute. Jessica's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked like calculating anger. How much? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. $183,000. Linda gasped. Maria's eyes went wide. Roberto leaned back in his chair with an expression that suggested he wasn't entirely surprised. But Jessica's reaction was the most revealing. Instead of surprise or happiness for my good fortune, her face showed something closer to betrayal. You've known about this while we've been fighting about $5? She asked. I found out about it 3 days ago, but yes, I've known about it during our recent conflicts. And you didn't think to mention it? You let me organize this whole intervention? Let me worry about our relationship? Let me bring the family together to talk about your financial obsession? When you've been sitting on nearly $200,000? I looked at her carefully, noting the assumptions embedded in her question. Jessica, why would my inheritance change anything about our financial boundaries? Because you don't need to be so careful with money anymore. You don't need to count every dollar or track every expense. You can afford to help family when they need it. So my grandmother's death and generosity means I should become everyone's personal bank account? That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. You're assuming that because I'm going to inherit money, I should be more available for everyone else's financial needs. You're not happy that I'll have security. You're happy that you'll have access to my security. Roberto was shaking his head slowly. Jessica, do you hear yourself? Emma just told you she's inheriting life-changing money, and your first response is to calculate how it benefits you. I'm not calculating anything. I'm just saying that family helps family. And if Emma has the resources to help without it hurting her, then why wouldn't she? Because maybe the point isn't whether she can afford to help, Maria said quietly. Maybe the point is whether you actually need the help, or whether you're just used to having someone else subsidize your choices. Jessica turned on Maria with surprising venom. That's easy for you to say. You don't have 2 kids and a mortgage and all the expenses that come with raising a family. I have a daughter and a house payment too, Maria replied evenly. But I've never asked Emma for money because I budget for my own expenses. I make choices about what I can afford instead of asking other people to make those choices for me. The conversation had shifted, and I could see Jessica realizing that the intervention wasn't going the way she'd planned. Instead of a unified family front pressuring me to abandon my financial boundaries, she was facing questions about her own behavior and expectations. "This is ridiculous," she said, standing up abruptly. "Emma, you can keep your money and your self-righteousness. But don't expect things to go back to normal between us. Don't expect me to include you in family events or pretend that everything's fine when you've chosen money over relationships." "I haven't chosen money over relationships," I said. "I've chosen self-respect over being used." After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment with the trust document spread across my coffee table. The intervention had gone better than expected, largely because Roberto and Maria had refused to participate in Jessica's narrative about my selfishness. But it had also confirmed my worst fears about how the inheritance would be received. Jessica didn't see the trust fund as an opportunity for me to build security and independence. She saw it as a resource that should be available to her, a solution to the inconvenience of living within her own means. The fact that I might use the money for my own goals, paying off student loans, buying a house, building a retirement fund, seemed not to have occurred to her. The next morning, I called Mr. Chen and scheduled another appointment. If I was going to navigate the next phase of this family drama, I needed professional advice about protecting my inheritance from exactly the kind of pressure Jessica was already applying. "Ms. Martinez," he said when I explained the situation, "your grandmother anticipated this exact scenario. She included specific language in the trust documents that protects the inheritance from family claims or expectations. But more importantly, she left detailed instructions about how to handle requests for financial assistance." He pulled out another document I hadn't seen before, this one titled, "Emma's Inheritance Protection Guidelines. Your grandmother was very clear that this money was for your security and future, not for subsidizing other family members' lifestyle choices. She specifically mentioned concerns about your sister's financial management and your mother's tendency to enable dependency." I stared at the document, amazed once again by Rose's foresight. She'd known exactly what would happen when this inheritance became public, and she'd tried to protect me from the guilt and manipulation that would inevitably follow. "What kind of protection guidelines?" I asked. "Practical advice about setting limits, legal language you can use to refuse requests, and most importantly, a reminder that protecting your financial future is not selfish. It's responsible." As I read through Rose's guidelines, I felt something shifting inside me. Not just relief at having her support, but a growing sense of my own power. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to have real financial independence. I was going to have choices that didn't depend on other people's approval or assistance. But I was also going to have to defend those choices against people who thought my good fortune belonged to them. And based on Jessica's reaction to learning about the trust, I suspected the real battle was just beginning. The week leading up to my 27th birthday felt like a countdown to an explosion. Jessica had apparently told extended family members about the inheritance. Because I started receiving calls and messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. Suddenly, cousins who'd never shown interest in my life were reaching out to catch up and see how I was doing. The pattern was always the same. Casual conversation, expressions of surprise about Grandma Rose's secret trust, and then carefully worded questions about my plans for the money. Did I think Rose would have wanted me to help family members who were struggling? Had I considered that such a large inheritance came with responsibility to share with others who weren't as fortunate? By Thursday, I'd received 7 of these fishing expeditions, disguised as concerned family outreach. It was becoming clear that Jessica had launched a broader campaign to establish the narrative that my inheritance should be viewed as a family resource rather than a personal windfall. The most telling call came from my Aunt Carmen, Linda's older sister, who I'd always liked for her directness. But this conversation felt different, more calculated. "Emma, Mija, I heard about Rose's gift to you. What a wonderful surprise that must have been. It was definitely unexpected. I'm sure she wanted you to be taken care of, but I also think she would have wanted you to remember that family takes care of family. You know, your cousin David is struggling with student loans, and Maria could really use help with her daughter's daycare costs. Aunt Carmen, the trust isn't even accessible yet, and when it is, I'm planning to use it for my own security." Of course. But once you're secure, you'll have so much more than the rest of us. It just seems like Rose would have wanted the money to benefit the whole family, not just one person. I hung up feeling exhausted by the manipulation. The inheritance was transforming me from Emma, the family helper, into Emma, the family bank. People who'd never asked about my financial struggles were now deeply invested in my financial windfall. Friday afternoon, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was going to have a birthday party. Not the kind of low-key gathering I usually preferred, but a real celebration with friends and chosen family. I was going to mark my 27th birthday and my financial independence with people who loved me without expecting anything in return. I invited Sarah, of course, and my friend Kate from college, who'd moved to Portland the previous year. I invited my coworker James, who'd become a genuine friend over months of collaboration on freelance projects. I invited Roberto and Maria, the only family members who'd supported my boundary setting during the intervention. But I didn't invite Jessica or Linda. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to celebrate a milestone without worrying about family drama or managing other people's emotions about my choices. The party was planned for Saturday evening, the day after my actual birthday. Simple food, good wine, and conversation with people who knew my value extended far beyond my bank account. It felt like a statement of independence that went deeper than just financial security. Saturday morning, I woke up 27 years old and almost $200,000 richer. The trust fund transfer had been completed electronically at midnight, and my bank account showed a balance that made me dizzy with possibility. For the first time in my adult life, I could say yes to opportunities without calculating the cost. I could also say no to requests without worrying about overdraft fees. The feeling was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I'd spent so many years operating from scarcity, making every decision through the lens of financial limitation, that abundance felt foreign and slightly unreal. My first impulse was to pay off my student loans immediately, to eliminate that monthly payment that had loomed over my budget for years. My second impulse was to call Jessica and Linda and share the excitement of finally having security. But I resisted both urges, remembering Rose's guidelines about taking time to make thoughtful decisions rather than reactive ones. Instead, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with the morning light streaming through my window, thinking about what this inheritance really meant. It wasn't just money. It was Rose's belief in my potential, her investment in my future, her protection against the exact family dynamics that had been playing out over the past few weeks. It was also my ticket out of the cycle of financial dependence and guilt that had defined my family relationships for years. With this inheritance, I would never again have to choose between helping someone and taking care of myself. I would never again have to justify wanting to keep money I'd earned. I would never again have to feel guilty for prioritizing my own financial security. The bank transfer confirmation felt like the most beautiful document I'd ever received. The birthday party Saturday evening was everything I'd hoped it would be. Sarah had strung lights around our small living room, and the warm glow made the space feel magical rather than cramped. Kate brought homemade empanadas. James contributed a playlist that perfectly captured the celebratory mood, and Roberto arrived with a bottle of champagne that he claimed was for toasting new beginnings. Maria came with her 8-year-old daughter Sophia, who immediately charmed everyone by asking if she could help serve the food. Watching her carefully arrange cheese and crackers on a platter, I was struck by the difference between this gathering and typical family events. There was no underlying tension, no careful navigation around sensitive topics, no feeling that I needed to manage anyone's emotions except my own. "So," Kate said as we settled into the living room with our wine, "how does it feel to be officially 27 and financially independent?" "Surreal," I admitted. "I keep checking my bank account to make sure the money is really there." "What's the first thing you're going to do with it?" James asked. I'd been thinking about this question all day. Pay off my student loans. Then probably look for a better apartment. Maybe something with a dedicated office space, so I can grow my freelance business. "That's very practical," Roberto said with approval. "Your grandmother would be proud that you're thinking about building rather than just spending." "Have you heard from Jessica or your mom since the money became available?" Sarah asked gently. 3 missed calls from Jessica, 2 from my mother, and a text asking if we can all meet for dinner tomorrow to celebrate properly. I made air quotes around the last part. "I haven't responded yet." "Are you going to?" Maria asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to try to rebuild the relationship, but I'm worried that any contact right now will just be seen as an opening for more financial requests. Roberto set down his wine glass and looked at me seriously. Emma, can I tell you something about your grandmother that you might not know? I nodded. When Rose was about your age, maybe a little older, her own family tried to pressure her into sharing your grandfather's life insurance money. They said she should help her siblings who were struggling, that she didn't need all that money for just herself and her children. What did she do? She moved across town and limited contact for about 2 years. She said it was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it was also what allowed her to build the financial security that eventually let her help people on her own terms, when she chose to, without resentment or obligation. The room was quiet as I processed this information. Rose had faced the exact same family pressure I was experiencing now, and she'd chosen temporary distance over permanent financial entanglement. She never told me that story, I said. She probably didn't want to influence your decisions, but she did tell me years later that learning to say no to family was what taught her the difference between love and manipulation. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I felt something settling into place inside me. This group of friends, this chosen family, had celebrated my good fortune without a single request or suggestion about how I should use it. They had asked about my plans because they cared about my happiness, not because they were calculating their potential benefit. The contrast with my biological family's reaction couldn't have been starker. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, and my phone had accumulated several more messages overnight. Jessica had escalated from missed calls to lengthy texts about how family celebrations should include actual family. Linda had sent a photo of a cake she'd bought for Emma's special day, clearly hoping guilt would motivate me to come over and claim it. But the message that surprised me came from Marcus. Emma, I know you're probably overwhelmed with family pressure right now. I wanted you to know that I've talked to Jessica about her expectations regarding your inheritance. I think you should do whatever feels right for you, regardless of what anyone else thinks you should do. Also, Tyler and Mia miss you, but they don't need to be part of this adult conflict. I stared at that last sentence for a long time. Marcus was right that the children shouldn't be caught in the middle of financial disputes, but Jessica had been the one dragging them into the conflict by claiming I was abandoning them. His message suggested that he was finally setting boundaries with his wife about using their kids as emotional leverage. I decided to call him directly. Marcus, thank you for the text. Can I ask you something honestly? How bad are things at your house right now? He sighed deeply. Pretty bad. Jessica is furious that you didn't invite us to your birthday party, and she's convinced that you're going to cut the family off completely now that you have money. She's been obsessing over how much you might help with Tyler's orthodontics or Mia's dance lessons. She's already planning how to spend my inheritance. She's not seeing it as your inheritance anymore. She's seeing it as family money that happens to be in your name. The entitlement was breathtaking, even though I'd been expecting it. Jessica had moved from asking for small favors to viewing my entire financial future as a resource for her family's benefit. Marcus, what would happen if I said I wasn't going to give any of the inheritance money to family members? Honestly, I think Jessica would see that as a betrayal that she couldn't forgive. She's convinced herself that Rose meant for the money to benefit all of us, despite the fact that the trust documents clearly state it's for you alone. And what do you think I should do? I think you should protect yourself first. I've been married to Jessica for 9 years, and I love her, but I also know that she doesn't have healthy boundaries around money or family obligations. If you give her access to your inheritance, even small amounts, it will never be enough. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and thinking about boundaries and family loyalty and the difference between helping and enabling. Rose's letter was still in my purse, and I pulled it out to read her words again. Help others when you can and want to, but never because you feel obligated or guilty. And remember that saying no to people who would take advantage of you is not selfish. It's self-preservation. I was still reading when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Jessica standing on my doorstep, holding a small, wrapped gift and wearing the expression she used when she was trying to appear vulnerable and contrite. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Happy birthday, Em, she said, offering the gift. I wanted to bring this by personally. Thank you. I accepted the package but remained in the doorway. Can we talk? I feel like things got really heated last week, and I want to clear the air." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her into my apartment. She settled onto my couch and looked around with the careful attention of someone cataloging assets. "This place is really cute," she said. "Though I imagine you'll be moving somewhere bigger now." "I'm considering it." "That's exciting. A house, maybe?" "With your new financial situation, you could probably afford something really nice." I sat down across from her, noting how quickly she'd steered the conversation toward my money. "Jessica, why are you really here?" "I wanted to apologize for how I handled things last week. I was stressed about money, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." It was a more genuine apology than I'd expected, but something in her tone suggested there was more coming. "I also wanted to talk about moving forward. Now that you have this inheritance, I think we have an opportunity to rebuild our relationship on a healthier foundation." "What does that mean?" "It means I won't need to ask you for small amounts anymore. If something big comes up, something really important like the kids' education or a family emergency, maybe we could have a different kind of conversation." There it was. Jessica wasn't apologizing for her past behavior. She was negotiating for future access to my money. The inheritance hadn't eliminated her sense of entitlement. It had just raised her expectations. "Jessica, I'm not going to be anyone's backup financial plan anymore. Not for small amounts, not for large amounts." Her expression shifted, the vulnerability disappearing behind something harder. "Emma, you have nearly $200,000. We're talking about family needs, not wants. Tyler's going to need braces. Mia wants to take dance lessons. Those aren't luxuries. And you and Marcus have good jobs and the ability to budget for your children's needs. But why should we struggle when you have more money than you could possibly need for yourself? Because they're your children and your responsibility. Because my inheritance doesn't change the fact that you're adults who should handle your own expenses." Jessica stood up abruptly, her mask of reconciliation completely gone. "You know what, Emma? I was wrong to apologize. You have become selfish. You've become someone who would rather hoard money than help family members who love you. I'd rather build security than enable people who refuse to live within their means. Our grandmother would be disgusted by your attitude. Our grandmother specifically set up this trust to protect me from exactly this kind of pressure. She anticipated that family members would feel entitled to money that was never meant for them. That's not true. Rose loved all of us equally. But she trusted me with her financial legacy. There is a difference." Jessica grabbed her purse and headed toward the door, then turned back with one final attempt at emotional manipulation. "Fine. Keep your money and your self-righteousness. But don't expect me to pretend that everything's normal between us. Don't expect to be included in family events or holidays. And don't expect Tyler and Mia to understand why their aunt suddenly became too good for them. I've never been too good for Tyler and Mia, but I'm too smart to let you use them as weapons against me." After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment feeling simultaneously relieved and heartbroken. The conversation had confirmed everything Marcus had warned me about. Jessica didn't see the inheritance as my financial security. She saw it as a solution to her own budget constraints. She wasn't interested in rebuilding our relationship unless it included access to my money. But I also felt something I hadn't expected: peace. For the first time in years, I'd set a clear boundary and held it firm, even when faced with emotional manipulation and threats of family exclusion. I'd chosen self-preservation over people-pleasing, and the world hadn't ended. Monday morning brought a message from Mr. Chen asking if I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss investment strategies for the trust fund. I made an appointment for Wednesday, eager to start building the kind of long-term financial security that Rose had envisioned for me. I also made another decision that felt both scary and liberating. I was going to tell my extended family exactly where I stood on sharing the inheritance, clearly and publicly, so there would be no confusion or false hope about future financial assistance. I crafted a message that I sent to the family group chat, the one that included Roberto, Maria, Carmen, and several cousins who'd been reaching out since learning about the trust. Hi everyone, I wanted to address the questions I've been getting about Grandma Rose's inheritance. I'm incredibly grateful for this gift, and I plan to use it to build long-term financial security, through paying off debt, buying a home, and investing for retirement. I won't be using any of the inheritance money to provide loans or financial assistance to family members. I know this might disappoint some of you, but I believe this is what Rose intended when she set up the trust specifically for me. I love you all and look forward to continuing our relationships based on shared experiences and affection rather than financial expectations. The responses came quickly and revealed exactly who had been hoping for access to my money. Carmen sent a hurt message about family loyalty. 2 cousins I barely knew expressed disappointment that I wasn't sharing the blessing. But Roberto and Maria both sent supportive messages, and several family members thanked me for being clear about my boundaries. Tuesday evening, Linda called. I let it ring twice before answering, knowing this conversation would be difficult but necessary. Emma, I got your message to the family. I think you're making a mistake that you're going to regret. What kind of mistake? You're prioritizing money over relationships. You're choosing individual wealth over family bonds. Mom, I'm choosing financial independence over financial obligation. There's a difference. Your grandmother didn't leave you that money so you could become isolated from your family. She left me that money so I could build security and independence. She was very clear about that in her letter to me. Linda was quiet for a moment. What letter? I realized I'd never mentioned Rose's letter to anyone except Sarah. Grandma Rose left me a letter explaining why she set up the trust and how she wanted me to handle family pressure about sharing it. Can I see it? No, Mom. It was meant for me. Emma, I think you're misunderstanding what family means. We're supposed to help each other, support each other through difficult times. I agree, but help should be reciprocal and voluntary, not demanded or expected. For the past 2 years, I've been helping others without receiving help in return. Now I have the resources to take care of myself, and suddenly everyone's concerned about family obligation. It's different now. You have more than you need. According to who? According to people who want access to what I have? Mom, I'm 27 years old. This money represents my ability to buy a house, start a retirement fund, maybe even start my own business someday. Why is my financial security less important than everyone else's convenience? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, circling through the same arguments. Linda couldn't understand why I wouldn't share money I didn't really need with family members who were struggling. I couldn't make her understand that my financial independence wasn't negotiable, regardless of how much money I had. Wednesday's meeting with Mr. Chen was exactly what I needed. He outlined investment strategies that would allow the inheritance to grow while providing me with ongoing financial security. He also connected me with a financial advisor who specialized in helping young adults build wealth responsibly. Ms. Martinez, he said as our meeting concluded, I've handled many inheritance disputes over the years, and I want you to know that your approach is both wise and exactly what your grandmother intended. She specifically chose not to leave money to other family members because she wanted you to have complete control over these resources. Do you think I'm being selfish? I think you're being responsible. Your grandmother watched you give money you couldn't afford to people who could afford to solve their own problems. She set up this trust to break that cycle. That evening, I had dinner with Sarah and told her about the week's developments. She listened without judgment as I recounted Jessica's visit, Linda's phone call, and the mixed reactions to my family message. How do you feel about it all? She asked, sad, but also relieved. I think I needed to find out which family relationships were based on genuine affection and which ones were based on what I could provide. And what did you find out? That Jessica and my mom see me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be loved. But Roberto and Maria, and even Marcus, in his way, have shown me that some family relationships can survive boundary setting. What about Tyler and Mia? That's the hardest part. I love those kids, but I can't have a relationship with them that's controlled by Jessica's financial expectations. I'm hoping that as they get older, we can connect directly without her mediation. 3 weeks later, I signed papers on a small house in the Alberta Arts District. It had 2 bedrooms, a real office space for my freelance work, and a tiny backyard where I could plant a garden. The down payment came from the inheritance, but the mortgage was based on my own income, ensuring that my housing security didn't depend entirely on Rose's gift. Moving day was chaotic and wonderful. Sarah and Kate and James all helped carry boxes and furniture, and Roberto showed up with his truck to transport my desk and bookcases. Maria brought lunch for everyone, and her daughter Sophia appointed herself the official unpacker of kitchen items. As we sat on my new living room floor eating sandwiches surrounded by boxes, I felt something I'd been missing for months: uncomplicated joy. These people were celebrating my achievement without calculating how it benefited them. They were happy for my success without expecting access to my resources. The next morning, I woke up in my own house for the first time. Sunlight streamed through windows that belonged to me, in a space that I'd chosen and could afford on my own terms. I made coffee in my own kitchen and sat at my own table, planning the workday ahead. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Aunt Emma, this is Tyler. Mom gave me your new address. Can I ride my bike over sometime to see your new house?" I stared at the message, my heart aching with how much I missed my nephew. But I also knew that any contact with Tyler would likely involve Jessica, and I wasn't ready to navigate that complexity yet. I typed back carefully. "Hi, buddy. I miss you too. Let me talk to your mom about planning a visit, okay?" His response came quickly. "Mom says you don't want to see us anymore because you have money now." The manipulation was so blatant, using an 8-year-old to deliver emotional blackmail, that I felt angry rather than guilty. I called Marcus immediately. "Marcus, Jessica is telling Tyler that I don't want to see him because I have money now. This has to stop." "I know. I've talked to her about it, but she's convinced that you've chosen money over family. She sees the kids' disappointment as evidence that she's right. The kids are disappointed because she's telling them I've abandoned them, not because I actually have. I know that. Emma, would you be willing to have Tyler and Mia over for an afternoon sometime when Jessica isn't involved? I could drop them off and pick them up." The offer was tempting, but I could imagine Jessica's reaction to her children visiting my new house without her supervision. I don't think that would end well for anyone involved. Probably not, but the offer stands if you change your mind. That afternoon, I was unpacking books in my new office when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck and a man holding a large floral arrangement. The card read, "Congratulations on your new home. Love, Roberto and Maria." It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. Here was family love without strings attached, celebration without expectation, support without hidden agendas. I was arranging the flowers in my kitchen when my phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Emma, I drove by your new house today. It's beautiful." "Thank you. I've been thinking about our conversation, about what you said about family and obligation and choice." I waited, not sure where this was heading. "I think maybe I've been wrong about some things. About the way I raised you girls to think about money and family responsibility." "What do you mean?" "I think I taught Jessica that being family meant always having access to each other's resources. And I think I taught you that loving family meant always saying yes to their needs." It was the closest to an apology I'd ever heard from my mother, and I wasn't sure how to respond. "I don't think either of those lessons was healthy," she continued. "And I think your grandmother knew that when she set up that trust the way she did." "Do you really think that?" "I think Rose saw something I missed. That you were going to need protection from the family dynamics I created, and that money was going to be a way for people to take advantage of your good heart." We talked for another hour, and while Linda didn't explicitly apologize for the pressure she'd applied about sharing the inheritance, she did acknowledge that my boundaries were reasonable. She also mentioned that Jessica had been struggling with the reality that her financial safety net was gone. "She's having to look at her own budget for the first time in years," Linda said. "It's been difficult for her. Learning to live within your means is difficult for everyone at first," I replied. "But it's also necessary." A month after moving into my house, I received an unexpected email. Tyler's teacher was organizing a school art show, and Tyler had specifically requested that I be invited because I was, quote, "the artist in the family." The invitation included a note that parent attendance was encouraged, but not required. I stared at the email for a long time, debating whether attending would be worth the potential drama with Jessica. Finally, I decided that my relationship with my nephew was more important than avoiding uncomfortable interactions with his mother. The art show was held in Tyler's elementary school cafeteria, with children's artwork displayed on every available wall space. I found Tyler's section and was genuinely impressed by his drawings. He'd inherited some artistic talent, and his teacher had clearly encouraged his creativity. "Aunt Emma?" Tyler's voice cut through the crowd, and suddenly he was hugging my waist with the enthusiasm only 8-year-olds could muster. "You came!" "I wasn't sure if you would." "Of course I came. I wouldn't miss seeing your artwork." "Mom didn't think you'd want to come to family stuff anymore." I crouched down to Tyler's eye level. "Tyler, I will always want to celebrate your achievements. I love you and Mia very much, and that hasn't changed." "Then why don't you come to dinner anymore?" It was an impossible question to answer honestly without criticizing his mother. Sometimes adults have disagreements that make family gatherings complicated, but my love for you isn't complicated at all. Jessica appeared at my shoulder before I could say anything else. "Emma, I didn't expect to see you here." "Tyler invited me. His artwork is really impressive." "Yes, he's very talented." Her tone was carefully neutral, but I could sense the tension beneath it. "Can we talk privately for a minute?" We walked to a corner of the cafeteria, away from the crowd of parents and children. "I want you to know that this is difficult for me," Jessica said without preamble. "Having you here, pretending everything's normal, when you've essentially cut us out of your life." "I haven't cut you out of my life. I've set boundaries around money." "It's the same thing, Emma. Money is how families help each other. Money is one way families can help each other, but it shouldn't be the primary way, and it definitely shouldn't be expected or demanded." "So where does that leave us?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about for weeks. "I think it leaves us with a choice. We can try to rebuild our relationship based on shared experiences and mutual respect, or we can continue to fight about whether I should subsidize your lifestyle choices." "I don't want your money anymore," Jessica said, but something in her tone suggested this wasn't entirely true. "I just want my sister back." "I'm still your sister, but I'm not your personal ATM, and I'm not going to apologize for protecting my financial independence." We stood in awkward silence for a moment, watching Tyler show his artwork to other family members. He was so proud and excited, completely unaware of the adult tensions swirling around him. "He misses you," Jessica said finally. "I miss him too. And Mia. Maybe we could try having family dinners again. Nothing about money, just family time." I studied her face, trying to determine if this was genuine or another manipulation. "Jessica, if I agree to that, I need you to understand that my financial boundaries are permanent. I'm not going to change my mind about the inheritance, and I'm not going to be available for emergency loans or financial assistance." "I understand. And if you use Tyler and Mia to pressure me about money, or if you tell them that I don't love them because I won't give you money, I will leave and not come back." She flinched slightly at the directness, but nodded. "Okay." I wasn't entirely convinced that Jessica had truly accepted my boundaries, but Tyler was watching us hopefully from across the room, and I realized that I was willing to try one more time for his sake. The first family dinner in 2 months happened the following Sunday. Jessica cooked, Marcus handled the kids, and I brought dessert from a bakery I could now afford without checking my bank balance first. The conversation stayed safely away from financial topics, focusing instead on Tyler's upcoming baseball season and Mia's fascination with dinosaurs. It wasn't perfect. I could sense Jessica calculating the cost of the expensive dessert I'd brought, and there were moments when the conversation felt forced rather than natural. But Tyler and Mia were relaxed and happy, and for the first time in months, I felt like their aunt rather than their family's financial resource. As I drove home to my own house, I reflected on how much had changed since that Tuesday morning when Jessica had asked for $5 for coffee. I'd gone from being financially vulnerable and emotionally manipulated to being financially secure and emotionally protected. I'd learned the difference between family love and family exploitation. Most importantly, I'd learned that protecting my own well-being wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Rose's inheritance had given me more than money. It had given me the power to choose how I wanted to be treated, the security to set boundaries without fear, and the wisdom to understand that real love doesn't come with financial obligations attached. 6 months later, my freelance business had grown enough that I was considering hiring an assistant. The inheritance had allowed me to take on better clients and invest in professional development, creating a sustainable income that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or assistance. Jessica and I maintained a cautious relationship built around family gatherings and the children's activities. She never asked me for money again, though I suspected this had more to do with pride than genuine acceptance of boundaries. We would probably never be as close as we'd been before, but we'd found a way to coexist that didn't require me to compromise my financial independence. Tyler was thriving in Little League, and I attended every game I could manage. Mia had started taking art classes, discovering her own creative talents. Being part of their lives without being responsible for funding their activities felt like the healthiest family dynamic I'd ever experienced. The inheritance remained mostly invested, growing steadily toward the retirement security that Rose had envisioned for me. But the real gift hadn't been the money itself. It had been the lesson that my value as a person wasn't measured by my willingness to solve other people's financial problems. And every morning when I woke up in my own house, drinking coffee at my own table, planning a workday that would contribute to my own financial goals, I whispered a quiet thank you to the grandmother who had seen this future for me, even when I couldn't see it for myself. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't what someone gives you, it's what they teach you to protect. 1 year later, I was standing in the kitchen of my house, preparing for what had become our monthly tradition: Sunday dinner with the parts of my family that had learned to love me without a price tag attached. Roberto was bringing his famous tamales, Maria was making her daughter's favorite tres leches cake, and Marcus had texted that he'd arrive early to help set up the new patio furniture I'd recently purchased. The past 12 months had been a masterclass in distinguishing between genuine relationships and transactional ones. Some family members had gradually faded from my life once they realized I wasn't going to be their financial solution. Others, like my cousin David, who'd never asked me for money in the first place, had grown closer as we built connections based on shared interests rather than shared bank accounts. Jessica remained the most complicated relationship to navigate. She'd kept her word about not asking for money, but there were still moments when I caught her calculating the cost of things in my life. Last month, when I'd mentioned considering a vacation to Europe, I'd seen her face tighten with what looked like envy mixed with resentment. She'd made a comment about how nice it must be to have that kind of freedom, and I'd realized that part of her would always see my financial independence as something that had been taken away from her, rather than something I'd earned the right to protect. But Tyler and Mia had flourished in the more stable family dynamic. Without the constant undercurrent of financial tension, our interactions had become genuinely joyful. Tyler had developed a passion for photography, and I'd bought him a beginner's camera for his 9th birthday. Not because Jessica had hinted that it would be nice, but because I wanted to support his artistic interests. Mia had started writing stories about dragons and princesses, and we spent hours together crafting elaborate tales during our regular afternoon visits. The inheritance itself had grown to over $200,000 through careful investing, providing me with a security blanket that had transformed every aspect of my life. I'd been able to take creative risks with my freelance business, turning down low-paying clients and focusing on projects that challenged me artistically. The financial buffer meant I could afford to be selective, to build a portfolio that reflected my actual skills rather than my desperation for rent money. My mother had surprised me the most during this year of family recalibration. After months of awkward interactions, she'd finally asked me directly about Rose's letter and what it had said about family financial dynamics. When I'd shared some of the key passages with her, Linda had gone quiet for a long time, before admitting that she'd never considered how her approach to family money might have set up unhealthy expectations. "I think I taught you girls that love was supposed to hurt a little," she'd said during one of our coffee dates. That if you weren't sacrificing something for family, then you weren't really committed to the relationship. But watching how much happier you've been since setting boundaries, I'm starting to think I had it backwards. It had been the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from her, and while our relationship still required careful navigation, there was a foundation of mutual respect now that hadn't existed before. Linda had even started seeing a financial counselor to work on her own money management, acknowledging that constantly needing help from her daughters wasn't sustainable or healthy. The doorbell interrupted my reflection, and I opened it to find Marcus standing on my porch with a bottle of wine and an unusually serious expression. "Emma, we need to talk before everyone else gets here," he said, accepting my invitation to come inside. "It's about Jessica." My stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. Despite the relative peace of the past year, I'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Jessica to find some new way to challenge my financial boundaries. "What's going on?" Marcus sat down at my kitchen table and rubbed his forehead in a gesture I'd come to recognize as his way of preparing for difficult conversations. "She's been talking about asking you for a loan again, a big one this time." "For what?" "She wants to go back to school, get her MBA. She's convinced that if she has an advanced degree, she'll be able to make enough money that she won't need to worry about family financial help anymore." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "She sees it as an investment in her independence." The irony was almost amusing. Jessica wanted to borrow money from my inheritance to fund her own path to financial independence, apparently unable to see the contradiction in that logic. How much is she talking about? $40,000. She's researched programs, calculated living expenses, figured out exactly how much she'd need to cover tuition and childcare while she's in classes. I sat down across from him, processing this information. "And she thinks I should just hand over $40,000 because she's decided to pursue an MBA? She thinks you should invest in her future because she's family, and because you have the resources to help without it affecting your own security. Has she considered student loans? Employer tuition assistance? Any of the normal ways people fund graduate school?" Marcus's expression told me everything I needed to know. She says, why should she take on debt when you could help her avoid it? She's convinced that this is exactly the kind of family investment that would make everyone's lives better. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the small garden I'd planted in my backyard. Rose's favorite flowers were thriving there. Lavender and rosemary and the bright yellow marigolds she'd always said reminded her of sunshine. I'd planted them as a reminder of her wisdom and her protection. And looking at them now, I could almost hear her voice telling me that some patterns never change. "Marcus, what do you think I should do?" "I think you should say no, and I think Jessica is going to react badly when you do." "How badly?" "I think she's going to see this as the ultimate test of whether you really consider her family anymore. In her mind, this isn't just about the money. It's about whether you're willing to invest in her future the way she would invest in yours. Except she's never been in a position to invest in my future, because she's spent years taking money out of it." "I know that. You know that. But Jessica has convinced herself that the past year of not asking for small amounts somehow erases the pattern of the previous years." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, and by the end, I had a clear picture of what was coming. Jessica had decided that my inheritance should fund her MBA, and she'd built an elaborate justification for why this was different from her previous financial requests. She'd probably present it as a business proposal, complete with projected earnings and repayment schedules that we both knew would never be honored. When Roberto and Maria arrived with their contributions to dinner, I was still processing the implications of Marcus's warning. The afternoon proceeded normally on the surface. Good food, easy conversation, Tyler showing off his latest photographs while Mia regaled us with her newest dragon story. But underneath, I was preparing for another round of family financial drama. The confrontation came the following Tuesday, exactly as Marcus had predicted. Jessica called and asked if she could come over to discuss an exciting opportunity that involved both of us. I agreed to meet at a coffee shop near my house, preferring neutral territory for what I suspected would be a difficult conversation. She arrived with a folder full of printouts and a laptop, clearly prepared to make a formal presentation. The MBA program she'd researched was impressive, a well-regarded school with a strong alumni network and excellent job placement rates. She'd calculated projected salary increases, estimated the time to recoup the investment, and even researched the specific career paths that would be available with an advanced degree. "Emma, this is a chance for me to completely transform my earning potential," she said, her excitement genuine and infectious. "With an MBA, I could move into senior management, maybe even start my own consulting firm eventually. The starting salaries for graduates from this program are nearly double what I'm making now. I listened to her pitch without interrupting, impressed despite myself by the thoroughness of her research. She'd clearly put significant time and effort into understanding the costs and benefits of graduate school, and her enthusiasm for the program was undeniable. It sounds like a great opportunity, Jessica. Have you looked into financing options? Her face shifted slightly, the practiced presentation giving way to something more familiar. Well, that's where you come in. I've run the numbers, and if I take out student loans for the full amount, the debt service would eat up most of the salary increase for the first few years. But if I could get family funding for the tuition, the return on investment would be immediate. Family funding? A loan from you. $40,000, which I know sounds like a lot, but it's less than a quarter of your inheritance. And I'd pay it back with interest once I graduate and get the salary bump. There it was, the same entitlement wrapped in business language. Jessica had convinced herself that my inheritance was a family resource that should be available for her educational investments, and she'd prepared a compelling case for why lending her money was actually a smart financial decision for both of us. Jessica, I'm not going to lend you $40,000. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Her expression went through several rapid changes: surprise, disappointment, and then a familiar anger that I recognized from our confrontations the previous year. Emma, this isn't like the old requests for small amounts. This is an investment in my future, in my family's future. This would allow me to become financially independent, instead of occasionally needing help with expenses. And there are many ways to finance that investment that don't involve me. But why should I take on crushing debt when you could help me avoid it? Why should I pay interest to strangers when I could pay it to family? Because it's not my responsibility to fund your career advancement. Because student loans exist specifically for this purpose. And because I've learned that the best way to maintain family relationships is to keep them separate from financial obligations. Jessica closed her laptop with more force than necessary. So that's it? You'd rather see me struggle with loan payments than help someone you supposedly love achieve their goals? I'd rather see you take responsibility for your own goals instead of expecting other people to fund them. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she said, her voice rising enough that other coffee shop patrons were starting to glance in our direction. The money has changed you, Emma. You've become someone who measures love in dollars and cents. No, Jessica. I've become someone who understands the difference between love and financial obligation. And I've learned that the people who truly love me don't see my bank account as a solution to their problems. She gathered her papers and stood up abruptly. Fine, I'll figure it out myself, like I always do. But don't expect me to forget this conversation. Don't expect me to pretend that you were there for me when I really needed support. After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, thinking about patterns and expectations and the ways people convince themselves that their desires constitute other people's obligations. Jessica's MBA request had been more sophisticated than her previous appeals for money, but the underlying assumption was identical. My resources should be available for her convenience. The aftermath of this conversation was swift and decisive. Jessica stopped attending family dinners, citing scheduling conflicts that everyone understood were really about avoiding me. She unfriended me on social media and stopped responding to my texts about Tyler and Mia's activities. Within a week, it became clear that she'd decided my refusal to fund her education was grounds for ending our relationship entirely. Marcus kept me informed about the fallout at home. Jessica had applied for student loans and been approved, but the reality of taking on significant debt for her MBA had dampened her enthusiasm for the program. She'd started complaining to anyone who would listen about my selfishness, about how I'd chosen money over family, about how different I'd become since receiving the inheritance. She keeps saying that the old Emma would have found a way to help, Marcus told me during one of our phone conversations. She's convinced that you've fundamentally changed as a person. Maybe I have changed, I replied. Maybe I've learned to value myself enough to say no to unreasonable requests. The most painful part of Jessica's renewed rejection was losing regular access to Tyler and Mia. She'd resumed using the children as emotional leverage, telling them that Aunt Emma was too busy with her new life to spend time with family. When Tyler's school play came around, I learned about it from Roberto rather than from Jessica, and I suspected my invitation had been deliberately withheld. But this time, I was better equipped to handle the manipulation. Instead of feeling guilty about disappointing the children, I felt angry about Jessica's willingness to use them as weapons in an adult financial conflict. Instead of questioning my decisions, I felt confident that protecting my boundaries was the right choice, even when it came with painful consequences. 3 months after the MBA conversation, I received an unexpected message from Maria. Jessica had been complaining to extended family members about my refusal to help with her education expenses, and Maria wanted me to know that not everyone was buying Jessica's version of events. "Most of us think you made the right choice," she wrote. "Carmen might disagree, but Roberto and I and several others think Jessica needs to learn that graduate school is her responsibility, not yours. We've all managed to fund our own education and career advancement without expecting family members to bankroll our ambitions." The support felt validating, but more importantly, it confirmed what I'd come to understand about family relationships. The people who truly cared about my well-being respected my right to make decisions about my own money. The people who saw me primarily as a financial resource were the ones who couldn't accept my boundaries. As I approached the 1-year anniversary of that first conversation with Mr. Chen about the trust fund, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. I'd lost some family relationships, but I'd also discovered which relationships were worth preserving. I'd gained financial security, but more importantly, I'd gained the confidence to protect that security from people who saw it as theirs to claim. The inheritance had given me more than money. It had given me the power to choose how I wanted to be treated, and the wisdom to understand that real love doesn't come with financial strings attached. Rose's gift hadn't just secured my future. It had taught me how to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. And every morning when I woke up in my own house, planning a day that belonged entirely to me, I felt grateful not just for the financial freedom, but for the emotional freedom that came with finally understanding my own worth. Some people see inheritance as money passed down from one generation to the next, but Rose's real gift to me was the lesson that self-respect isn't selfish. It's essential. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is teach them that you're not available to be taken advantage of, no matter how much money you have. The $5 Jessica had asked for that Tuesday morning seemed like such a small thing at the time, but it had been the beginning of everything. The boundary that led to bigger boundaries, the no that taught me how to say no, the moment I finally stopped setting myself on fire to keep other people warm. And I'd never been happier to disappoint someone in my life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.